I am joined now by three of this country's best political analysts. We have Democratic strategist Robert Zimmerman, James Taranto, editor of OpinionJournal.com, and syndicated columnist Miguel Perez. Thanks for being with us, gentlemen. We spent a good bit of time this week, as has every news division, on the IMIS issue. It's an important debate. What do you take away from this week's discussion?
Well, I think what's most critical to me is that the response to the despicable words Don Imus used has been really so important because it's brought back to the American culture a debate about decency and standards. And it finally has begun to bring new leaders to the forefront who have been playing an important role in terms of reminding America about what the what we have a right to expect from the entertainment industry, the music industry, and also from talk radio.
Miguel?
It's an interesting discussion. It's one that we should have had a long, long time ago. Unfortunately, a man's job is at stake here, and I don't know if the penalty was really appropriate in terms of firing the guy. I'm not quite sure whether that was the right approach.
I don't know. To my mind, the biggest outrage of this is that CBS and NBC waited a week before firing him, because what that shows you is they didn't fire him because he violated their standards. They fired him because they buckled under the public pressure, and you know, they ended up making Al Sharpton and Jesse Jackson, who are really bigots themselves and whose bigotry has done a lot more harm than Don Imus has ever had, look like heroes.
I think quite to the contrary. The public pressure is one of the heroic moments of this whole battle. The fact that the networks gave him a two-week leave and just didn't even give him a fine is a disgrace. The fact the public demanded a change in the marketplace, that's the victory here for decency.
But you know, the interesting point here is I think that a lot of people have committed this kind of error before, offended people left and right, and they get away with an apology. Sometimes an apology that sometimes seems very phony. In this case, we have an apology that seems real genuine. The guy really means what he says when he says he made a stupid mistake.
Mr. Imus's charitable contributions are considerable. Should that not weigh in?
Absolutely.
Well, clearly, there's no question his charity work is very respected, but it doesn't excuse the type of language and rhetoric and the kind of culture he helped to create as a shock jock. And I think the point here is, if you look at the dignity of the basketball, of the women athletes, and also of Coach Stringer, there's a real message here about what we have to aspire to. They're real role models for the rest of us.
I absolutely agree, but I think we also should say a word about rap music, because I just think it's so rich that we hear these quotes like we had earlier on the show about how, oh, well, when rap music uses this exact same kind of language, refers to women in the same degrading ways, uses these racial slurs, well, that's a culture that we have to respect. Give me a break.
Well, James is absolutely correct. There can't be the double standard, and if the double standard is allowed to continue, then this whole debate's for nothing.
And Point well taken, gentlemen. Go ahead.
It's also all related to the use of the N-word. If African Americans are allowed to get away with it, it's a double standard when they get offended by other people using it.
Very, very well considered statements. Thank you. The other thing we're going to talk about tonight is political. The White House emails, the White House is saying the emails were not lost intentionally. Here's what the White House spokeswoman had to say today.
And there are ways that you can retrieve any emails that are potentially lost, and we are beginning conversations with outside consultants, forensic consultants, who could tell us the best way to do that and the best way to retrieve those. But again, I would stress to you that we've seen no basis to conclude that there was any intentional wrongdoing with the use of these emails.
Whoops, we lost him, it seems to be.
Well, anyone who wants to believe that, they should call me, because I've got a bridge in Brooklyn. I'm glad to sell them. Okay, the reality is this is one more example of the White House withholding information and deceiving the American people. It was Alberto Gonzalez, his first claims before the Congress that he didn't know anything about this, and he was contradicted by his chief of staff. Is then another staffer resigning because otherwise she was afraid she'd commit perjury. The bottom line is here, this is a scandal, and it's resonating with the American people.
A sinister scenario. Do you buy into it, gentlemen?
Well, I think the underlying incompetence of the White House here and the Justice Department is not simply saying from the start the U.S. attorneys serve at the pleasure of the president. The president wanted to fire these guys, and we don't need to explain. The fact that they tried to offer explanations ended up getting them tied up in all these knots, and I don't know what happened with the emails, but I think on the whole it's a dreadful bit of incompetence.
Well, on top of all the problems they have with Gonzalez and so forth, now the missing emails, it's just too good a reminder of Watergate. And you know, the missing minutes on the tapes and all of that. It's just takes us all back to that.
Now, we have Attorney General Gonzalez testifying next week before the Senate Judiciary Committee. Will this be an investigation or will this be political theater? Are we into the realm of fantastic here, Robert?
Well, the White House has taken us into a realm of political theater, but this is going to be an investigation. And let me remind you, James, while I wouldn't disagree with you about this administration's incompetence, when you have Republican members of the Congress calling up the U.S. attorneys demanding that individuals be indicted before Election Day, and then when they don't get the answers they want, like Senator DeConcini slamming the phone.
DeConcini was one of
You're
yours.
right, forgive me, Senator Domenici slamming down the phone on that U.S. attorney, that shows an abuse of power. And when you see Karl Rove and the White House political operatives play a role in the selection of U.S. attorneys, this isn't about incompetence. This is about raw abuse of political power.
Well, let's just be clear here. If Domenici abused his power, which it sounds like he probably did, that's an abuse of congressional power, not executive.
It doesn't make a difference. It still represents the Bush administration's abuse of power.
But I'm going to go out on a limb and make a prediction here. I don't think Alberto Gonzalez will end up on the Supreme Court.
No. Well, that was a stretch.
That's
Miguel.
very impressive. I think Alberto Gonzalez is in a very, very hot water. He doesn't have a good excuse here. Either way he goes, he's in trouble.
This is a big day for him. Do you think that, that it will end up being the make or break day for him? Or are events overtaking this testimony? We've had to wait so long for the testimony.
We've had to wait long for the testimony. The bottom line is his credibility is done as U.S. Attorney General. The real issue here is how far deep does it go into the White House? Every sign indicates this is really about the White House's political agenda, not just about Attorney General Gonzalez.
Anybody else?
I would not be surprised to see Gonzalez resign before too long.
All right. Well, we will be watching it glued to the tube, as they say, on Tuesday. Thanks very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Robert Zimmerman, Miguel Perez, and James Taranto. Thank you. Coming up at the top of the hour, the Situation Room with Wolf Blitzer.